Modern people associate ancient Rome with magnificent architecture, philosophy, and invincible legions. However, behind the facade of this brilliant civilization lay a frightening economic secret. This entire gigantic empire was built on the backs of millions of people who were completely deprived of their basic human rights. They were the foundation on which the wealth of the most powerful state of antiquity was built. It is difficult to comprehend the scale of this system without specific figures and facts. At certain periods in history, slaves made up more than a third of the entire population of the Apennine Peninsula. This means that every third person on the street was someone's personal property. Sounds crazy, right? This raises the logical question of how it was possible to control such a large number of people. How could millions of captives be forced to work without destroying the state from within? The answer lies in an incredibly complex, cruel, and pragmatic system that the Romans built over centuries. They created the perfect machine of oppression and exploitation. But here's where it gets interesting. This system did not consist solely of chains, whips, and endless punishments, as is often portrayed in movies. The Romans were too smart to rely solely on brute physical force. They used psychology, economic incentives, and even glimmers of hope to make slaves work at maximum efficiency. In this video, we will explore 10 striking facts about what it was like to be a slave in ancient Rome. We will delve into historical realities that will make you look at the ancient world in a new light. Be sure to watch until the end, because some details will completely change your perception of this era. Subscribe to the channel and let's begin our historical investigation. The Roman writer and scholar Marcus Terentius Varro left behind very detailed treatises on agriculture. In his works, he decided to systematize absolutely everything that a landowner uses on his huge estate. Sounds like a boring inventory for tax purposes, doesn't it? But his method of dividing property is truly shocking to any modern person. Varro divided all agricultural equipment into 3 clear and frighteningly pragmatic categories. The first group was silent tools, which included carts, plows, hoes, and shovels. He assigned semi-talking tools to the second group, meaning oxen, horses, and other working animals. Finally, there was a third category, which he called speaking tools, or instrumentum vocale. By the term speaking tools, Varro coolly meant living people who were in slavery. Legally, slaves were not considered persons at all in the eyes of the Roman state or society. They were merely objects, the absolute and unconditional property of their masters. Modern corporations often use soulless terms such as human resources. The Romans simply saw no point in pretending and called things by their real names. If an owner's cart broke down, he simply bought a new one at the market. If a slave fell ill and died, the master went to the slave market for a replacement. No emotions, just pure business and calculating losses. But here's what's really interesting about this ancient system of asset classification. Treating a person as a tool meant that the same rules of exploitation applied to them. A tool must work as efficiently as possible, bringing profit to its owner. If a tool is idle, the owner loses potential money. Therefore, the life of agricultural slaves was an endless cycle of hard physical labor. They woke up before dawn and worked in the fields until sunset. The owners of latifundia carefully calculated how many calories a slave needed to work. They gave out just enough cheap grain to keep the person from dying of exhaustion. Modern ergonomics experts would call this extreme optimization of work processes. The Romans simply practiced this method 2,000 years before the science of labor appeared. They understood perfectly well that a well-fed and rested slave was a direct loss for the estate. Therefore, the tool had to function at the limit of its physical capabilities. Sometimes ancient texts are striking in their straightforward cruelty towards enslaved people. For example, another Roman author, Cato the Elder, advised selling old and sick slaves. Why waste food on a broken tool that is no longer useful? The thought of such cynical logic sends a chill down the spine. This system deprived people not only of their freedom, but also of their very right to human identity. In documents, they were often recorded simply by their function or country of origin. Their individuality was erased, leaving only a physical shell designed to serve the needs of the empire. And that was only the beginning of their difficult life journey. Ultimately, the concept of the speaking tool became the legal foundation of all Roman slavery. It allowed citizens to morally distance themselves from the suffering of millions of people. It is easier to ignore pain and tears when the law convinces you that what you are looking at is just a talking shovel. This is a frightening example of how the legal system can change human perception. When we talk about Roman slaves, the same image often comes to mind. It is an emaciated man with a pickaxe, working in a deep mine or chained to the oars of a galley. However, the reality was much more complex, and a slave's life depended directly on his skills. The huge difference in professions created its own classes within the slave class. Educated captives, especially those from conquered Greece, were worth their weight in gold. They often became teachers for Roman children, personal physicians, architects, or financial secretaries. These people lived in rich houses, wore nice clothes, and ate good food. Their brains were too valuable to waste on manual labor. Imagine a modern top manager or leading IT specialist. They receive huge bonuses and live in comfort, but legally they are still hostages of their company. Intelligent Roman slaves were in a similar situation, only without the right to resign at will. Their golden cage was much more spacious, but it was still a cage. At the same time, at the other end of the spectrum were those who were unlucky enough not to have an education. Slaves sent to silver mines or quarries lived in truly inhuman conditions. They worked in narrow, dark tunnels without proper ventilation or daylight. Surviving in such places for more than a few years was considered a miracle. The mortality rate in the mines was so high that they were often used as a death sentence. This was called damnatio ad metalla, condemnation to the mines, which effectively meant slow execution through labor. People worked in chains, breathed toxic dust, and regularly died from cave-ins. It sounds like the worst nightmare, but for tens of thousands, it was a daily reality. Another terrible fate was working in agricultural mills and bakeries. Slaves were often fitted with special wooden collars around their necks to prevent them from eating flour. They walked in circles for hours, turning heavy millstones along with donkeys and mules. Modern monotonous assembly line work seems like paradise compared to this torture. But here it becomes interesting to see how the Romans valued these different lives. A high-class slave doctor could cost 50 times more than an ordinary laborer. Owners invested huge sums of money in training their slaves to increase their market value. It was similar to modern investments in employee education, only with the right to resell the person. Urban slaves who served in the homes of patricians often looked down on rural slaves. A paradoxical social snobbery arose within the most disenfranchised class of Roman society. A slave pouring wine for a senator considered himself far superior to someone who dug the earth in the provinces. Human psychology is amazing. Even at the very bottom, people find ways to rise above others. The division by profession helped the Romans maintain order among the huge mass of captives. When slaves are separated and live in completely different conditions, it is more difficult for them to unite for a rebellion. A city secretary is unlikely to find common ground with an exhausted miner from the provinces. This ancient tactic of divide and rule worked flawlessly for centuries. As a result, a slave's profession became his destiny, determining every aspect of his existence. Skills and knowledge could save him from a painful death doing hard labor and ensure a tolerable life. Your office work may be tedious, but in ancient Rome, the ability to read literally saved lives. This makes us reevaluate the value of a regular school education. The streets of ancient Rome were always incredibly busy and crowded. In this crowd of thousands, patricians, plebeians, merchants, and slaves constantly mingled with each other. A surprising historical fact is that slaves did not wear any special uniforms. Outwardly, they often looked exactly like ordinary poor free citizens of Rome. Once, a seemingly very logical and reasonable idea was put forward in the Roman Senate. One of the politicians proposed introducing mandatory distinctive clothing for all slaves. This would help the guards easily identify fugitives and control the movement of slaves around the city. It sounds like a standard security measure that is used in any prison today. However, the Senate categorically rejected this proposal, and the reason for the rejection is striking in its pragmatism. Politicians feared that if slaves wore uniforms, they would suddenly realize their own numbers. According to various historical estimates, Slaves made up between 30 and 40% of Rome's population. Seeing thousands of people in identical clothing on the streets, slaves might feel their enormous power. Imagine a modern metropolis where every third resident works for free and hates the system. If they suddenly realized that there were millions of them and only a few thousand armed guards, the empire would collapse. The Romans realized that the visual anonymity of slaves was their best defense against mass uprising. The invisibility of the majority became the main tool for preserving the power of the minority. This fear of rebellion haunted the Roman elite throughout the history of the state. The memory of Spartacus's devastating uprising left a deep scar on the Roman national psyche. They understood one simple thing: the outcome of a rebellion is determined not only by bravery, but also by numerical superiority. Therefore, they did everything possible to ensure that slaves never realized their true power. The lack of uniforms also played an important psychological role in the lives of the slaves themselves. By blending in with the crowd of free citizens, they could briefly feel like part of society. This created an illusion of normality that helped reduce their internal tension and despair. Sometimes a small illusion of freedom works better than the strongest metal chains. But there was another, darker side to this forced anonymity. Any free person in poor clothing could be mistaken for a runaway slave. If the poor man had no influential patrons, he could be captured and sold at the market. In a world without passports and identity cards, the line between freedom and slavery was frighteningly thin. Interestingly, wealthy masters still liked to dress their personal servants in luxurious clothes. This was not done for the comfort of the slaves, but to demonstrate their own status and incredible wealth. A slave in expensive fabrics was a walking advertisement for the financial well-being of his ambitious master. Modern billionaires buy yachts for this purpose, while the Romans simply dressed their property in silk. This hidden multitude created a constant atmosphere of mild paranoia among the elite in Rome. The masters knew that they were surrounded by people who had every reason to wish them a painful death. They slept in houses full of slaves, dependent on their mercy at night. It was like living on a powder keg and hoping that a spark would never fly by. In the end, the Roman Senate's decision to abandon uniforms proved to be a brilliant tactical move. Ignoring the problem on a visual level helped to delay social unrest for many centuries. Modern political strategists call this managing the perception of the masses. The Romans simply wanted to sleep peacefully at night without fear of having their throats slit. One of the most difficult aspects of slavery concerned a basic human need: starting a family. Legally, Roman slaves had no right to enter into an official, legal marriage. Roman law only recognized marriages between free citizens of the empire. For slaves, there was only the concept of informal cohabitation, which was called contubernium. This status meant that the union of two slaves existed solely at the mercy of their owner. The master could destroy this family forever at any moment, without explanation. He could sell the husband to another province, leave the wife in Rome, and the law was completely on his side. No courts, no appeals, just one word from the master, destroying lives. Modern corporate contracts sometimes prohibit workplace romances, which seems like a strict rule. But imagine a system where your boss could literally sell your spouse to the other side of the continent. Slaves lived in constant fear that tomorrow might separate them from their loved ones forever. This psychological pressure was no less exhausting than the hard daily labor in the fields. But here's what's really scary about this system of family relations in the ancient world. Any children born into such a union automatically became the property of the master from the moment they took their first breath. The status of a child was always determined solely by the status of its mother at the time of birth. If the mother was a slave, the baby was added to the list of inventory in the estate's accounting books. The owner had every legal right to take the child away from its mother and sell it at the market. Children were often sold at an early age to make a quick profit or pay off debts. No one cared about the mother's grief, because according to the law, it was simply the sale of livestock offspring. It sounds cruel, but such was the harsh economic reality of ancient slavery. Interestingly, some owners, on the contrary, encouraged the creation of such families on their estates. They understood a simple thing. A slave who has a family becomes more submissive and cautious. A person has something to lose and will think twice before rebelling or trying to escape. The family became an invisible chain that held the slave tighter than any iron. In addition, the birth of new slaves within the estate was extremely profitable from an economic point of view. Buying an adult slave at the market cost a fortune, while raising your own was much cheaper. Such slaves, born in the master's house, were called vernai, and they often enjoyed great trust. They had known no other life since birth and were considered less likely to run away. Despite all the legal prohibitions, slaves tried to preserve family ties at any cost. Ancient Roman tombstones often feature touching epitaphs dedicated to partners in contubernum. They called each other husbands and wives, ignoring the official terminology of cold Roman law. The human need for love and affection cannot be abolished even by the strictest senatorial decree. Sometimes slaves managed to save up enough money to buy not only themselves, but also their families. It was an incredibly long and difficult journey that required tremendous willpower and luck. But the chance to save their children from the fate of a talking tool gave people incredible motivation to work. Hope has always been the most powerful fuel in this ruthless, ancient machine. The ban on legal families was another way of dehumanizing the enslaved population. By denying slaves the right to official marriage, the Romans emphasized the gap between citizens and living property. Modern society considers the right to a family to be inalienable, but for millions of people in the past, it was an unattainable luxury. History teaches us to value the rights that we take for granted today. Maintaining discipline among millions of slaves required a system of harsh and inevitable punishments. In ancient Rome, physical violence against slaves was not considered a crime. It was the everyday right of the owner. The slightest offense, whether it was a broken vase or slow work, was followed by whipping. Pain was the universal language that masters used to communicate with their livestock. But the most terrible crime on the part of a slave was always considered to be an attempt to escape. The Roman economy could not afford to lose valuable workers, so fugitives were punished as severely as possible. If a captured fugitive was not killed as an example to others, he was permanently branded with a mark of shame. The unfortunate man's forehead was branded with a hot iron bearing the letters FUG, which stood for fugitivus, fugitive. Imagine a modern justice system that leaves an indelible scar on your face. This mark could not be washed off or hidden. It ruined a person's life forever. Even if the slave was later freed, society always saw him as a former criminal. The FUG brand was an ancient analog of an indelible criminal record that haunted a person to the grave. In later periods of the empire, when branding the face was considered too barbaric, a new system was devised. A heavy, indelible metal collar was placed around the neck of a slave prone to escape. These collars were often engraved with the owner's name, address, and a promise of reward for capture. It was an ancient analog version of the modern police GPS bracelet for criminals under house arrest. The inscriptions on such collars often sounded frighteningly mundane. "I ran away. Catch me. Return me to my master." A certain amount of solidi or sestertii was guaranteed to be paid for the return of living property. These collars were welded onto the slave's neck by a blacksmith, and it was impossible to remove them without a special tool. The person was forced to live, sleep, and work with a piece of cold metal rubbing their skin raw. Professional hunters of runaway slaves, known as fugitivari, turned this hunt into a lucrative business. They tracked down fugitives throughout the empire using dogs, informants, and networks of informers. For them, it was just a job that paid well. Nothing personal, just returning lost property to its rightful owner for a percentage of its value. Interestingly, the severity of punishment often depended on the mood or character of the particular owner. Some owners were known for their sadism, throwing offending slaves into pools to be eaten by moray eels. Others, following the advice of Stoic philosophers, preferred to punish them by depriving them of food or lowering their status. The absence of a single law protecting animals and slaves made their fate a complete lottery. Roman lawyers argued for a long time about whether a seller was liable if he concealed a slave's tendency to run away from the buyer. In the end, it was decided that the seller was obliged to warn about such defects in the goods. If you bought a slave and he ran away the next day, the transaction could be annulled through the courts. Human trafficking was subject to strict consumer protection rules, which sounds incredibly cynical. Fear of physical punishment and branding was the main tool for keeping slaves in place. This system of terror worked effectively, breaking the will of millions of people over the centuries. No walls or locks could hold a person as securely as the fear of red-hot iron. The Romans were masters in the art of psychological and physical oppression. Modern labor laws prohibit even fines in the workplace, let alone corporal punishment. Reading about Roman methods, one begins to sincerely appreciate modern bureaucracy and the labor code. Your boss may be unbearable, but at least he can't order letters to be burned into your forehead. This is a small but very important step forward in the history of human civilization. Roman security was based on one of the most brutal legal principles in human history. It was the law of collective responsibility of slaves for the life and health of their master. According to this rule, if a slave murdered his master, it was not only the guilty party who was punished. Absolutely all slaves who were under the same roof at the time of the crime were subject to execution. The logic behind this bloodthirsty law was simple and ruthless in its paranoid essence. The Senate believed that the other slaves were obliged to foresee the crime and protect their master at the cost of their own lives. If they failed to do so, it meant that they were either silent accomplices or had shown criminal negligence. And for this negligence, Roman law demanded the highest punishment for all without exception. One of the most famous and frightening cases of the application of this law occurred during the reign of Emperor Nero. The prefect of Rome, Peculiium, was killed by one of his domestic slaves in a fit of personal revenge. According to the law, all 400 slaves living in his huge mansion were to be put to death. Among them were elderly people, women, and even small children who were physically unable to stop the murderer. This sentence caused a real storm of indignation even among the inhabitants of Rome, who were accustomed to cruelty. Crowds of free citizens took to the streets, trying to block the road to the place of mass execution. People understood the absolute injustice of killing 400 innocent people because of the actions of one madman. Modern society would protest for much less, and the Romans did not stand aside either. But here it becomes interesting to see how the Roman Senate reacted to these mass protests. The emperor convened an emergency meeting to discuss the possibility of pardoning the innocent servants. However, the influential senator Gaius Cassius Longinus delivered a harsh speech defending the severity of ancient law. He declared that only absolute fear could protect the patricians from their own domestic environment. Cassius argued that the safety of the elite was more important than the lives of a few hundred tools. He convinced the Senate that if they gave in even once, slaves throughout the empire would begin to kill their masters. As a result, Nero ordered troops to be sent to disperse the protesting citizens, and the sentence was carried out. 400 people were executed in one day to maintain an atmosphere of absolute terror. Imagine a modern corporation where the entire office is executed because of the theft of one employee, including cleaners, interns, and those who just happened to be passing by the director's office that day. By the standards of ancient Rome, this was not considered madness, but a necessary measure of state control. Collective responsibility was the glue that held the walls of the slave system together. This law created an atmosphere of mutual suspicion and informant culture within the homes of wealthy Romans. Slaves were forced to spy on each other because someone else's mistake could cost them their lives. If one of the servants began to show aggression toward the master, the others were the first to tie him up and hand him over to the guards. The instinct of self-preservation forced them to become the best defenders of their own tormentors. This system made successful attempts on the lives of patricians within their own homes extremely rare. The law worked exactly as its cruel but incredibly calculating creators had intended. The fear of death paralyzed any attempts at conspiracy, turning every slave into a free bodyguard for his master. It was a brilliant piece of social engineering in the ancient world, brilliant in its inhumanity. The story of Peculiium remains in the chronicles as a grim reminder of the price of ancient greatness. Roman law is often praised for its logic and fairness, which form the basis of modern laws. But we must not forget that this same law easily justified the mass murder of innocent people. There are no perfect empires, and Rome was certainly no exception to this historical rule. Despite its status as living property, the Roman system of slavery had one striking and paradoxical feature. Slaves were officially allowed to own personal money and even accumulate their own property. This financial cushion was called Peculiium, which translated as a small herd or property. It sounds incredibly illogical. How can a thing own other things or money? But the Romans were not overly sentimental. They were guided by pure economic gain. The owners understood that slaves worked much more efficiently if they had at least a minimal financial incentive. Peculiium could consist of tips from guests, saved food, or a share of the profits from the owner's shop. It was an early, primitive version of modern bonuses and rewards for good work. The most enterprising slaves, especially those who managed their master's business, could amass a decent fortune. Sometimes the peculium of a successful manager exceeded the wealth of a poor but free Roman citizen. Some slaves could even buy other slaves with their money, who were called vicari. Imagine the picture. A slave has his own slave who does the dirty work for him. However, there was one huge and very unpleasant legal catch in this financial scheme. Formally, according to the law, all peculium remained the absolute property of the master at any given moment. The master could encourage the slave to save money for years, and then one day simply take all the savings. It's like saving for retirement in a bank account that is completely controlled by your unpredictable boss. But why did masters rarely take this money away without a good reason? Because it would have destroyed the entire motivation system, and slaves would have stopped trying to earn profits. If a tool works better when it has coins in its pocket, let those coins stay there. Ancient Rome was a society built on strict unspoken agreements and adherence to the rules of the game. The presence of peculium radically changed the psychological state of a slave, giving him a purpose in life. Accumulating funds gave hope, and hope is the most powerful remedy for despair and rebellion. A slave who saves money will not plan to kill his master or escape to the mountains. He will work hard, keep accounts, and hide every copper coin under his mattress. Modern corporations use similar mechanisms to retain employees through options and long-term bonuses. You are promised a large payout in 5 years so that you don't quit and work yourself to exhaustion today. The Romans used this approach 2,000 years ago, only the stakes were immeasurably higher. At stake was not the purchase of a new car, but the acquisition of the right to dispose of one's own body. The main and most desirable goal of accumulating peculium was to buy one's freedom. An intelligent and hardworking slave could negotiate a fair price for his independence with his master. Once the necessary amount was collected, the slave literally bought himself from his owner. This deal was beneficial to both parties. The master received cash, and the slave received his long-awaited freedom. Sometimes masters deliberately inflated the price to keep a valuable specialist for longer, but in most cases, agreements were honored, as this supported the faith of other slaves in the system. This opportunity to buy oneself free made Roman slavery unique in the ancient world. It was not always a life sentence, leaving a tiny ray of light at the end of a dark tunnel. The institution of peculium proves that economics always triumphs over pure ideology or cruelty. The Romans may have been tyrants, but they knew how to count money better than any other people of antiquity. They turned slavery into a complex capitalist mechanism where even a slave could become an investor. It sounds cynical, but it was this cynicism that allowed the empire to flourish for many centuries. Ancient Rome was very different from other slave-owning societies of antiquity, especially Greece. In Rome, the process of freeing slaves was not a rare exception, but a regular and widespread practice. This legal process of granting or purchasing freedom was called manumission, from the words manus, hand, and mittere, to release. The master literally released the slave from under his heavy and authoritative hand. There were several official ways to carry out the manumission procedure. The most solemn was liberation before a magistrate, when a special stick, the vindictus, was placed on the slave's head. The owner could also free a slave in his will, which often led to mass liberations after the death of a patrician. Sometimes slaves were simply released during a dinner with friends, which was called manumission at the table. But here's what really makes the Roman system unique in the history of law. A former slave didn't just become a free man, he got a certain form of Roman citizenship. He became a liberto, freedman, and took the family name of his former master. Yesterday's slave Marcus became Marcus Tullius if he was freed by the famous orator Cicero. Imagine an immigrant who works hard for many years to obtain the coveted passport of a new country. Libertines followed a similar path, only they started from the position of a speaking tool. Of course, freedmen did not receive full rights. For example, they could not be elected to high political office. But they had the most important things: the right to a legal family, business, and legal protection. Interestingly, the connection between the former owner and the freed slave was not completely severed. The owner became a patron, and the former slave became his client, obliged to provide support and respect. The liberto had to vote for his patron in elections and sometimes help him financially. In essence, the Romans did not simply lose their slaves. They created a network of loyal and indebted citizens. Many freedmen became incredibly successful merchants, craftsmen, and financiers. Their past lives had taught them to survive, save every coin, and work 16 hours a day. Freeborn Roman plebeians often envied the wealth of these enterprising former slaves. The Roman poet Petronius even mocked such nouveau riche in the form of the caricatured rich man Trimalchio. But the main prize in this system was not freedom itself or the money earned. The main reward was the status of children born to a freedman after receiving manumission. The children of freedmen became full-fledged, 100% Roman citizens without any legal restrictions. They could serve in the legions, become senators, and rule a vast empire. This was tremendous social mobility for the cruel world of antiquity. A grandfather could be a prisoner of war in the quarries, a father could be a freed merchant, and a grandson could be a Roman magistrate. It was this ability to integrate former enemies and slaves into its society that made Rome so strong. The empire constantly renewed its blood with the most talented and ambitious people. Frequent manumission also served as an ideal valve for releasing social pressure. If every intelligent slave had a real chance of becoming a free businessman, why would he want to start a rebellion? The Romans ingeniously turned the most capable slaves into defenders of their own legal system. You won't destroy the ladder if you believe you can climb it yourself. As a result, manumission became a symbol of pragmatism, upon which the entire greatness of the Roman state was built. Freedom was a commodity that could be earned, bought, or received as a reward for loyalty. This capitalist approach to human destiny sounds frighteningly modern, doesn't it? The Romans invented the concept of the American dream 2,000 years before the discovery of America itself. December in ancient Rome was a special month that was eagerly awaited by all levels of society. It was the time of the festival of Saturnalia, dedicated to Saturn, the god of agriculture, and the end of the agricultural year. It was a period of total revelry, mass feasting, and gift-giving, which later influenced Christmas traditions. But for slaves, this holiday had a completely different, magical, and almost surreal meaning. During the days of Saturnalia, an incredible event took place, a temporary reversal of strict social roles. Once a year, the rigid hierarchy of Roman society was turned upside down. Slaves were officially allowed to wear the clothes of free citizens and put on the cap of a freedman, Peculiium. For a few days, talking tools turned into people with a voice and the right to rest. The most shocking ritual of the holiday was the joint feasts of masters and their slaves. Slaves were allowed to sit at the common table, and in some houses, the masters personally served them at dinner. Patricians poured wine for their servants, brought them food, and listened to their jokes. Imagine the CEO of a huge corporation spending the whole day making coffee and washing floors for his interns. But it gets more interesting. During these days, slaves were given unprecedented freedom of speech. They could openly criticize their masters to their faces, mock their habits, and express their dissatisfaction. And according to the unspoken law of Saturnalia, the master had no right to punish them for this audacity. It was the only time of year when a slave could call his tormentor an idiot and stay alive. Why did the Roman elite need this strange carnival of disobedience? Psychologists call this the safety valve effect in a high-pressure boiler. By allowing slaves to let off steam once a year, masters reduced the risk of real rebellions during the other 11 months. Better to listen to a couple of unpleasant jokes at the festive table than to get a knife in the back on a dark night. In addition, Saturnalia was a time for gambling, which was strictly forbidden on ordinary days. Slaves could play dice with their savings from their Peculiium right on the streets of the city. The city was filled with the noise, laughter, and shouts of gamblers from all walks of life. For a week, Rome was transformed into an ancient Las Vegas, where the boundaries between rich and poor were blurred. However, this temporary freedom had a cruel psychological downside. When the holiday ended, the freedmen's caps were removed and the slaves returned to their powerless status. The contrast between the merriment of Saturnalia and the harsh realities of everyday life was incredibly painful. Yesterday, your master poured you wine, and today he whips you again for the slightest offense. Some ancient philosophers criticized Saturnalia for giving slaves false hope. They believed that such contrasts only destabilized people's minds and made slavery even more unbearable. But tradition was stronger than any philosophical criticism, and the holiday was celebrated for centuries. People living in hell desperately needed at least a short vacation in paradise. Interestingly, during the holiday, masters often gave their slaves small gifts or money. These funds replenished their Peculiium, bringing them closer to the cherished day of possible redemption to freedom. Thus, even in moments of religious ecstasy, the Romans did not forget about economics. They stimulated labor productivity through festive corporate bonuses. Saturnalia demonstrates how complex and multifaceted Roman society was. It combined extreme cruelty with amazing carnival traditions that relieved social tension. This holiday proves that even in the harshest systems, moments of respite are necessary. Otherwise, the system will inevitably collapse under the weight of its own inhuman pressure. Among all categories of Roman slaves, there was one group whose life resembled the script of a Hollywood blockbuster. These were gladiators, the strongest, most enduring, and most aggressive slaves sent to fight for the amusement of the public. Being sent to a gladiator school, ludus, was often a punishment, but for some it was a chance for glory. Their lives were filled with daily pain, training, and the constant expectation of death on the blood-soaked sand. The gladiatorial combat industry was the ancient equivalent of modern professional sports of the highest achievement. Fighters lived in barracks and followed a strict diet of beans and barley to build muscle mass. They were trained by the best masters, who taught them deadly techniques with various types of exotic weapons. Investors poured huge amounts of money into training gladiators, so fights to the death were not as frequent as they are portrayed in movies. But there is a surprising paradox here. Despite being legally powerless slaves, gladiators became true idols of the crowd. Successful fighters were adored in the same way that fans today adore soccer stars or mixed martial arts fighters. Poems were written in their honor on the walls, and their names were chanted by tens of thousands of spectators in the Colosseum. Women from Rome's high society secretly went crazy for these scarred warriors. Gladiators were paid a share of the prize money for winning, which allowed them to accumulate huge fortunes. Some of them became very wealthy, although formally they remained the property of the school owner. They received expensive gifts from fans, quality medical care, and the best food. It sounds tempting if you forget that the next fight could be your last at any moment. The main motivation for each fighter was not fame or gold coins. The ultimate goal of every gladiator was to win the rudis, a symbolic wooden sword. Receiving the rudis meant honorable retirement and eternal, final liberation from fighting and slavery. Once a person received this piece of wood, they ceased to be a speaking weapon forever and became free. This wooden sword was the most precious object in the world for any gladiator. It was worth more than handfuls of gold because it represented the return of the right to one's own life. Former gladiators often remained to work in schools as trainers, receiving huge salaries. They became living legends, proof that the system could be defeated if you were strong enough. However, only a few of the thousands of unfortunate captives survived to reach the rudis. Most met their end on the hot sand of arenas throughout the vast empire. Their bodies were dragged through the gates of death to make room for the next bloody show. Their lives were bright but frighteningly short, like the flash of a spark from a sword striking a shield. The history of gladiators reveals the very essence of the Roman attitude towards human life and entertainment. The empire was ready to turn the deaths of its slaves into a grand, profitable, theatrical spectacle. Modern reality shows often play on the emotions and humiliation of participants for the sake of high ratings. The Romans simply took this concept to its logical, deadly conclusion. Ultimately, gladiators were the brightest stars in the dark sky of Roman slavery. They proved that even at the bottom of the social abyss, a person could fight for their dignity. Their courage inspired free citizens and forced them to respect those whom the law considered mere objects. They bought their freedom not with quiet labor, but with their own blood spilled before a roaring crowd. Summing up our dive into ancient history, one thing becomes clear. The system of slavery in ancient Rome was an incredibly complex, multi-layered, and cynically thought-out mechanism. It was not just blind cruelty, but a pragmatic economic machine that used people as fuel. The Romans created an ideal control structure where fear, hope, and greed worked together. When we compare these ancient methods with the modern world, it makes us feel a little uncomfortable. Of course, we no longer have wooden collars, brands on our foreheads, and the legal right to own people. But the principles of economic motivation, the use of bonuses, and the fear of losing one's job are suspiciously reminiscent of ancient Roman strategies. Modern corporate culture is, in many ways, a softer and more civilized successor to ancient latifundia. But in all this grim history, there is one bright and truly inspiring moment. Despite their status as talking tools, the ban on family and constant threats, slaves remained human beings. They loved, saved money, showed ingenuity, and fought for the right to be called free citizens. The human spirit proved stronger than any iron from which Roman chains were forged. If you enjoyed this historical investigation and want to learn more about the hidden mechanisms of the past, please support us. Write in the comments which fact about life in ancient Rome shocked you the most. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click the bell. There are many more amazing stories ahead of us that the modern world has long forgotten.